Hey everyone, tonight we start with parties from ancient Greece. And no, this isn't going to be a quiet night with wise men drinking wine and politely nodding at each other. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to see who is joining us from all over the world. Now, turn down the lights and let's get used to our trip together tonight. You aren't going to a party. That would mean happiness, being spontaneous, and the chance to leave early without any social problems. You are going to a symposium, which is a very serious word that the ancient Greeks used to hide the fact that a group of grown men planned to drink wine until their opinions were louder than their reasoning. The wording of the invitation was very careful. It didn't say anything about alcohol. It talked about talking, ideas, friendship, and maybe even virtue. This is how you know there will be wine, but food won't. Dinner is just a warm up, so you already ate somewhere else. The symposium is happening so that everyone can focus on the real goal. Seeing how many philosophical beliefs can survive being around wine for a long time. You come to the house acting like you're here to learn something. This is a nice lie. People don't call you out on it because they are lying too. You have to take part. It's strange to listen quietly. Silence can mean either being arrogant or being sober, and neither one is welcome. A servant takes off your shoes, which seems like a ceremony at first, but you soon realize it's mostly to keep you from slipping later. There are couches along the walls of the room. Chairs would suggest how to sit. Posture shows that you can control yourself. Everything goes wrong when you don't have self-control. You lie down, trying to look natural, but it's hard because the human body wasn't made to lie down while talking about morality. You look around and see that everyone else is pretending to be comfortable. You join them in this shared fantasy. Tomorrow, your spine will file a formal complaint. The lights are low, not for romance, but so that no one can see each other's faces clearly when judgment starts to go down. The room is full of quiet excitement as men get ready to talk about things they only half understand. You tell yourself that this will be a polite, thoughtful conversation with moderate drinking and reasonable conclusions. You make these promises like people do when they say they'll only have one cup. Then the wine comes. It is mixed with water because the Greeks were a lot of things, but they weren't suicidal. Even though you will completely ignore the ratio later, you nod in agreement. The symposium has officially started. Reason is still there at this point. It won't be there for long. The symposium shows its true purpose once everyone starts drinking. Not to find out the truth, but to see how sure a person can be that they are wrong while lying down. And you are about to join in with great enthusiasm. You should lie down as soon as you walk into the room. Not in the end. Right away, not after a polite pause. Standing for too long makes you look unsure, and being unsure is not cool at a symposium. There are no chairs to be found. This is on purpose. Chairs suggest order. Structure means having limits. Limits are the enemy of whatever is going to happen tonight. You pick a couch and lie down on it, trying to make it look natural. It isn't natural. The human body was not made to eat, drink, gesture, and argue about right and wrong while resting on one elbow like a fainting nobleman. But since everyone else is doing it, you go all in. Half reclining is worse than being wrong. It's awkward. Your left arm goes numb very quickly. You don't pay attention to it. If you complain, people will think you're weak, and weak people are easy targets for philosophical attacks. You move your position a little, which somehow makes it worse. You now accept that circulation is not required and that your dignity is already gone. Reclining isn't about being comfortable, it is about fairness. Nobody is taller than anyone else when everyone is lying down. Power is leveled. The authority becomes conversational. Also, it's much easier to spill wine when you don't have to get up to clean it up. The couches are lined up along the walls, making a ring of people facing each other. This makes sure that there is a lot of eye contact. You can't stay in the back. People will see, remember, and maybe even quote back to you what you say. Confidently, but wrong. Servants move. Quietly walked around the room, stepping over sandals and avoiding elbows. You think they're very good at what they do. They have done this a lot. They already know which guests will be the most annoying first. You can see the quiet competition as you get comfortable. Who looks the most at ease? Who acts like this is how they are? Who looks like they were born to argue? You try to match how easy they are. You fail, but no one says anything. They are too busy getting ready for their own shows. In theory, lying down also slows down drinking. In reality, it just makes refilling easier because the cups are already flat. You hold yours carefully and tell yourself to drink slowly. This choice lasts for about one conversation. At this point, everyone is still mostly clear. Voices are quiet. We measure laughter. People say what they think in a polite way. This is the illusion phase, which is the part of the night that everyone remembers fondly. You are now reclined, numb, and committed, even though it only lasts about 10 minutes. The symposium has really started. The wine comes sooner than you want and faster than you are ready for. It is brought in with ceremony, poured from a big bowl that everyone can use, and treated with the same respect that is usually given to religious objects. This should be your first sign. You are told in a polite and sure way that the wine has been mixed with water. This is meant to make you feel better. It shouldn't. Wine from ancient Greece is not the same as wine today. It is thicker, darker, and so strong that drinking it straight would make the symposium a public safety issue. Dilution is not moderation, it is life. You carefully take your first sip. It tastes sharp, earthy, and a little angry that you're being careful. You nod in agreement, as if you know a lot about wine. The same thing happens to everyone else. This is a room full of guys who think they know what they're doing. You quickly see that the ratio is ambitious, not reckless yet, but sure. The host wants people to talk. He wants to know what people think. He wants to argue. He wants everyone to be drunk enough to be honest, but not too drunk, enough to say it badly. You tell yourself that you will drink slowly. This is a common thought at symposia. and it's usually the last smart one of the night. You sip slowly and listen to the early conversations, which are about light topics, safe ideas, and gentle teasing. Everyone is still living in a civilized way. After that, someone fills your cup again. You didn't ask for this, it just happens. The cup is never empty long enough to feel lonely. You think about saying no to the refill, but that would mean either pride or lack of strength. You accept it with grace, but in your head you are rethinking how much control you still have. You feel warmer, more relaxed, and more able to speak as the wine settles in. You start to think that your thoughts are clearer than usual. This is wrong, but the confidence is strong. You talk a little more. You move your hands a little more. Your voice gets heavier, as if every word now needs to be heard. The same change is happening all over the room. The laughter gets louder. There are more interruptions. People get excited about agreements. Disagreements get personal. The wine is doing what it was meant to do. You look at the communal bowl and see that it is already lower than it should be. Someone makes a joke out of it. Someone else fills your cup again. You stop counting. At this point, the symposium crosses an invisible line. No one tells anyone. Everyone feels it, but no one says anything. Reason is no longer in charge of the night. The wine has taken over politely, quickly, and with full consent, and you are completely sure that this is going very well. At some point, someone decides that the night needs a plan. This is so cute. To keep things balanced, moderate, and give the impression of control, a symposium is set up. The person in charge of keeping the wine flowing, setting the pace, and making sure the symposium doesn't turn into a philosophical crime scene. People choose this person because they are respected, scary, or sitting closest to the bowl. None of. These traits will be important. The rules are announced at the symposium. He talks with confidence, as if there is still authority in this room. He talks about the right amount of wine to water, when to refill, and how important it is to not drink too much too quickly. Everyone agrees. These nods don't mean anything. They are ceremonial nods, like the kind you give when you don't want to follow directions at all. The system works for about 5 minutes. Carefully fill the cups. There are breaks between refills. People act like restraint is a value that everyone shares. You even think this might work. Then someone laughs too much. Then, without asking, someone else fills their cup again. Then the symposium fills his own cup again, which doesn't look good for a leader. You can see his pour-stir slowly fade as guests fill their wine glasses every time a servant walks by. No one directly questions him. That would be mean. Instead, everyone acts like the rules are just suggestions. How people act when there are no cars on the road. The symposium tries to reassert control. He coughs. He says something about moderation. A joke is the answer. Everyone in the room laughs. The time has passed. From now on, the symposium will be based on momentum. You see that people are no longer emptying their cups before filling them up again. This is a big step forward. Wine is now piling up. People talk over each other. The noise in the room gets louder. The symposium gives up and sinks deeper into his couch. accepting what will happen. This isn't a failure. This is how things have always been. The purpose of symposia is not to keep order, but to give the night a short head start before things get crazy. It gives things structure, like a thin rope gives structure to a landslide. You stop caring about who is in charge. No one is. The wine is in charge now, and this feels right, which is strange. The symposium is no longer acting like it is in charge. It has gotten back to how it should be, a room full of people who are sure of themselves, their minds are free, and their cups are never empty long enough to cool. Responsibility had its time. It went by without any noise or protest. Once, entertainment comes in when responsibility leaves the room. This is meant to make the night better. No, it doesn't. It does, though, make it louder. Someone makes a liar. This person thinks they are good at something. No one questions this belief because the wine has gotten to the point where it seems like too much work to disagree. You nod your head in appreciation as the first notes are played, even though you can't tell if the instrument is being tuned or slowly threatened. At a symposium, music is not just background noise. It needs attention. You should listen, respond, and look like you're moved. So you do. You tilt your head a little bit. You shut your eyes for a second. You make a face that says, yes, this is culture. But what you're really thinking is, this sounds better from a distance. Then you start to sing. Someone starts to read poetry. Someone else joins in. The beat is not clear. The amount is high. There is no other confidence like this. At the end, you clap politely. That's how civilized people act when they're not sure if something has gone wrong. The musician keeps going because of the applause. At this point, you know that the music isn't meant to be fun. It's being a part of it. It fills the room, stops silence, and gives everyone something to agree on without having to think too hard. You tell yourself that it's better than arguing more. This might not be true, but it makes me feel better. The music gets louder as the wine moves deeper into the room. Someone starts to tap along. Someone else hums the wrong way. A third person insists on changing the melody, which makes it worse. The lyre player takes these gifts with grace, which is impressive given the situation. You start to sway a little, but not because you like the music. It's because you've been lying down and drinking wine, which has made you lose your balance. You tell yourself that this looks normal. Servants move through the mess with practiced indifference. They've been through this before. They know how this will end. They refill cups while avoiding enthusiastic gestures and elbows that are too expressive. The music isn't fun anymore. It's the way it feels. It fits in with the laughter, the talking, and the wine that spills a little too close to the floor. You keep nodding, clapping, and acting like this is exactly what you wanted the night to be like. And you know something important in the back of your mind. This is just the start. Once the music has calmed everyone down and the wine has made you think that. Someone suggests games because your reflexes are so good. This is the point of no return. This is when the night stops pretending to be about culture and starts being about proving things that don't need to be proven. The games are easy. That's why they are dangerous. One is to flick wine from your cup at a target. A small dish or bowl is usually placed across the room. The rules are not explained very well or very quickly. People praise accuracy. People don't care about spills. You take part because not doing so would make you look weak or worse. Being sober, you flick and miss, wine spills on the floor, no one cares. Someone is actually cheering. This answer gives you more confidence and makes you flick again with less control. The goal is now just a theory. Another game is about riddles. Someone asks a smart question and expects smart answers. This works for about one round. After that, the riddles get more and more abstract. Then they get really hard to understand. And finally, they sound like statements. You give an answer anyway. Everyone agrees. It makes sense. The point isn't to win. The point is to take part. The point is sound. The room gets more lively as the games go on. Lying down turns into half sitting. Leaning too far forward while half sitting can be dangerous. The gestures get bigger, the cups tilt, and the leg of the couch gets suspiciously wet. You can see that people are laughing before the punchlines hit. There isn't always a joke. Laughter comes anyway, as if it were called. At some point, a desire to win comes out. Someone is determined to keep. Score. People give up on this almost right away when they can't agree on the rules or the numbers. Another person says they won anyway. There is no disagreement. Wine is everywhere now, on hands, clothes, the floor, and ideas. Stop trying to clean servants and start fixing things. They have agreed that the symposium is now in its active phase. You are very sure of your skills. You are sure that your aim has gotten better. Not yet. You knock something over with a dramatic flair when you flick wine. It makes a sound that makes it seem important. There is a short pause, and then people laugh. Making people laugh. This is how the games work. They take away self-control, boost bravado, and slowly push everyone to the edge of good behavior and then over it. You're having a good time. You are also acting like a complete idiot. It's true that both things are true. Just when you think the night has reached its peak of harmless chaos, philosophy shows up. Not on time and not politely. It just barges in, sits down between two spilled cups, and demands to be taken seriously. Someone clears their throat and says what they want to talk about. It doesn't matter which one you pick. Virtue, justice, love, the good life, and what truth is. You know the words right away and feel more confident because you've heard them before. This makes you sure that you can talk. You start to carefully put together a thoughtful sentence. It starts off well, it ends in a completely different place. Nobody notices. They are too busy getting ready to make their own contributions, which they think will be more deep. The room is full of opinions in no time. Not fights, just loud opinions. People talk as if they are learning ancient wisdom in real time, even though half of what they say they heard last week, and the other half they made up during the last refill. If you interrupt someone, they will interrupt you back. People don't think this is rude. People think of it as engagement. Gestures become dramatic. You point, wave, and lie back more forcefully. You hit your cup lightly and hold it at one point. steady just in time. This feels like a win that should be talked about. You do talk about it. No one pays attention. Someone says that you can teach virtue. Someone else says it can't. A third person says that both sides are wrong, but doesn't say why. You nod with enthusiasm because this feels right. The wine has gotten to the point where every thought seems important. Silence gets awkward. You don't talk because you have something to say. You talk because not talking feels like losing. Someone across the room laughs loudly at their own point. Someone else claps in agreement with something they didn't fully hear. This is how people come to an agreement. The argument gets more heated, louder, and personal. You feel strongly about something, but you don't know what it is. And then it happens. You say something that you think is great right away. It sounds good. It seems important. It lands with confidence. The room is quiet for a short time. Someone nods their head. Someone else says part of what you said again, but not quite right. You enjoy this very moment. You won't remember what you said tomorrow. You are sure that it changed everything tonight. Philosophy has taken over the symposium, and it's drunk. At some point, you start talking louder without any official notice. You don't choose to do this. It just happens, like the tides or how bad ideas get stronger after drinking wine. You are not yelling in your head. You are projecting. You know there is a difference, and you are sure everyone else does too. Your voice can now be heard across the room. This seems important. You lean forward on the couch and make big gestures as if just talking loudly will help you organize your thoughts. It can't, but the effort is impressive. People look at you when you talk loudly. This makes the behavior stronger. Looking someone in the eye becomes proof. You stop to make a point. The breaks are too long. Someone puts things in them. You raise your voice a little to get things back under control. This works, but only for a short time. Your points have made easier. Nuance has quietly left the room, taking reason with it. You don't explain why you believe something anymore. You just say it firmly, as if being firm is proof. This makes me very happy. Everyone else around you is at the same point. There are conversations that are the same. No one is really paying attention. People respond to parts of sentences by nodding vigorously at points that were never made. Disagreement and agreement become one loud activity. You also laugh louder. You don't really know why you're laughing. But the time seems right. Someone else is laughing with you. You think that this will be a happy memory for everyone. It won't. Your gestures become more ambitious. You knock something over again. This time, you notice you say you're sorry with enthusiasm and keep talking without waiting for a response. This is seen as okay. You are sure that your thoughts are clearer than they have ever been. You feel like you can say anything and you can't be stopped. In reality, you are saying the same thing again with more and more confidence and but accuracy. This is not your problem. You hear yourself talking and think, yes, this is exactly how a serious thinker sounds. This thought makes you feel better. The room is now full of life, noise, warmth, and vibrating with different opinions. People keep filling up their wine glasses. Servants are no longer stepping in. You are no longer taking part in the symposium. You are the meeting, and somewhere deep down, a quieter part of you is writing down things for tomorrow, even though they won't be read. That's when you see him. There is always one person at the symposium who shouldn't be there. Everyone else has slowly relaxed, softened, and emotionally leaned it into the wine, but this man is still sharp, upright, and annoying. He drinks a lot, but somehow nothing bad happens to him. You don't like this guy. He calmly recites, listening more than talking. Eyes clear, body steady. He can remember names. He follows the arguments. He responds at the right time. Moments. This is very upsetting. You look at his cup, hoping to see that it has been secretly filled with water. No, it hasn't. This man tilts his head a little bit every time you say something bold, not with anger or disdain, but with thought. This is worse. You can't tell if he agrees, disagrees, or is just writing down your mistakes for later. A person asks him something. He answers in a short, clear, and terrifyingly coherent way. For a moment, the room is quiet, as if they know a predator is there. You feel, though, you want to interrupt all of a sudden, not because you disagree, but because silence makes you feel unsafe. You are talking louder than you mean to. He looks at you again. This guy will never forget tonight. While others are telling the same stories over and over again, making them sound bigger than they are, and slowly falling apart, he keeps bringing up new points. You start to think that he isn't drinking wine the same way that everyone else is. He is using it like a tool to drink. This doesn't seem fair. You tell yourself that no one will remember what you said before. That, by morning, everything said here will turn into vague memories and a lot of regret. Every time he nods, smiles faintly, or answers something you said 10 minutes ago in a way that makes sense, this belief falls apart. You don't look him in the eye. You move around on the couch, acting like your arm has gone numb again. You laugh loudly at a joke nearby, hoping that will help you forget about your problems. No, it doesn't. At some point, someone says something nice about this man for being strong. He shrugs in a modest way. You also hate him for this. The symposium is still going on around him like a storm, but he is still there, a calm center of memory and clarity. You have a sinking feeling that this man will remember the night for you when you have trouble remembering it tomorrow. You decide to drink more in detail. This seems like the right thing to do, because if one person is going to remember everything you said tonight, you should at least make sure you don't. At some point during the night, usually between a time when someone is feeling very sure of themselves, you notice something important is missing when you argue and make a bad gesture. There are no respectable women here. This is not a mistake. This is the rule. The symposium is a space for men that has been very carefully planned to be that way. Wives, daughters, and women of good standing are still somewhere else, safe from this show, or maybe from you. The Greeks call this order. You say it's convenient because no one you have to deal with tomorrow is here to hear what you say tonight. The women who are present fall into very specific groups: musicians, entertainers, and courtesans. They are smart, well spoken, and much more sober than the people on the couches. This wasn't an accident. Someone needs to remember what really happened that night. They move through the room with practiced calm, playing music, singing, filling cups, and watching. They laugh at the right times. They pay close attention. They keep mental notes that you won't be able to see. You briefly convince yourself that this makes the symposium more philosophical. You think there are fewer things to do, just men and ideas. This is not right. The room gets louder, bolder, and much more sure of itself when people talk about things that haven't been tested by reality. Someone says something very dramatic about love. You enthusiastically nod your head, forgetting that no one in the room can disagree with this point of view based on their own experience. Another man says something about how women are. You agree without thinking about it because it's easier to agree than to think. At this point, the entertainers stay out of it. They heard all of this last week and the week before that, maybe from the same men. You try to impress one of them with a comment that you are sure is smart. She smiles in a nice way. You should be worried about this. No, it doesn't. Not having respectable women around gives you a strange sense of freedom. No limits, no witnesses that matter. Opinions grow without limits. Confidence grows. The symposium turns into a closed space where ideas can bounce around, without any resistance, getting louder and less accurate with each pass. You feel stronger, safer, and less responsible. You later realize that this is the problem. A room where only one type of voice is allowed doesn't get smarter. It gets louder. And tonight, volume is the winner. The room has changed by now. You can sense it. The air is thicker and heavier, full of smoke, wine, sweat, and confidence. The lights flicker. Shadows grow longer on the walls. What used to feel close now feels. Even though no one knew anyone had come in, it was still crowded. This is what happens when too many people have too many ideas. You are too warm, the kind of warm that makes you forget when you last felt good. You move around on the couch to cool off without getting up, which would have consequences. You take off a little bit of your clothes, and right away you know you made the right choice. No, it wasn't. Voices are always overlapping now. People don't take turns talking anymore. They hit each other. Someone laughs loudly from across the room, not because something was funny, but because they can't help it. You join in without knowing why. This feels right. Feelings start to come up in the conversations. What started out as vague ideas now sounds a lot like personal feelings. A discussion about justice turns into a complaint about being treated unfairly. An accusation comes out of a talk about virtue. Someone talks about honor. Someone else takes it personally. You don't know why, but you nod. You find yourself responding more quickly than you think. Before you finish saying something, it comes out of your mouth. You cut someone off in the middle of a sentence and then forget what you were going to say right away. You fill the quiet with sound. This looks like it will work. Everything feels important because of the heat. It seems like every statement is very important. You think that if you don't say something now, your thought will be lost forever. You say this even though it's not true. A lot of people talk at once. No one wins. Someone slams a cup down to make a point, spills of wine. There is no one to clean it up. That would make things take longer. Someone else leans forward a lot and bumps knees with a neighbor. I will say they're sorry loudly and then forget about it right away. You see that people's faces are redder now. The eyes are brighter. Movements are more precise. The symposium has reached its emotional operating temperature. This is where people say things that will come back to them later, usually at bad times. You feel alive, involved, and fully present. You also feel a little bit of danger, like being too close to a fire you made yourself. The room isn't just for the symposium anymore. The room is the symposium. It's loud, emotional, and full of life, and one careless sentence could make it unforgettable. At some point, the point you were so passionately defending just goes away. It goes on and on. It doesn't get better. It just slips out of your hands without making a sound, like a thought you were sure you had 5 seconds ago. You should be worried about this. No, it doesn't. What is left is faith, not mixed with anything else. Self-assurance. You don't remember what started the argument, but you know you were right. You can feel this in your bones, in the way you gesture, and in the way you nod while someone else talks, as if you're agreeing with points that may or may not be in line with what you were saying before. Someone is testing you. You answer right away without thinking. The answer is strong, clear, and has nothing to do with the challenge. No one says this. That would slow things down. Momentum is very important. Now, you start to say the same thing over and over. This feels like it was meant to be, like emphasis. You think that doing things over and over makes them stronger. It doesn't, but the conviction behind it is impressive. Every time you say your point again, you do it louder, as if volume could bring clarity back. This is happening all over the room. Everyone has lost the thread, but no one has lost their mind. Statements can move around freely, not connected to proof, context, or even grammar. They hit each other sometimes and are immediately cheered. You hear yourself say something and think, yes, that's what I meant. Even though you don't know what you meant, someone agrees with you with a lot of enthusiasm. This makes me feel good. You don't ask them why they agree or what they think you said. It's enough to agree. You are no longer arguing about ideas. You are standing up for a feeling, the feeling that you are right and that this is important. Being quiet makes me feel scared. You feel it right away. People do the same thing. There are a lot of overlapping statements in the room, but none of them need to be followed up on. Of which need to be followed up on. You lean back and feel good. You have finished your work here. You have made a real difference in the intellectual atmosphere of the evening. You know this because you are very sure of it. Someone nearby is still sober enough to see that something is wrong. You don't look at them. The symposium has reached a very important point. Memory is unreliable, clarity is gone, and confidence is completely independent. This is a risky place to be, but it feels great. Eventually, the symposium goes on and on. It just loses steam and falls apart like an argument that has run out of steam and can't stand on its own anymore. People don't say it's time to go. People just start to fail to keep going. You try to sit all the way up. This was a bad idea. Your body tells you firmly but briefly that lying on your side for hours while drinking was not part of its design. You stop for a moment, acting like this pause was on purpose. No one asks about it. A lot of people are doing the same thing. People stop talking in the middle of sentences all over the room. Someone starts to think of something, but halfway through, they forget what it was and start laughing instead. Someone else stands up too quickly, regrets it right away, and then pretends they were just stretching their mind. A servant comes in with a lamp. This is the signal for everyone. The night is in its last phase, which is helping people leave. The servant doesn't ask if you need help. They already know. You carefully get up, one limb at a time, as if you were dealing with gravity. Be willing to give in. The floor feels farther away than I thought it would. The couch, which let you down before, now tries to pull you back in. You say no. You get your shoes back. You look at them for a moment, as if you don't know what they're for. You finally put them on, but not the right way. The night air outside is brutally honest with you. It is colder, sharper, and not at all impressed by how sure you are. You take a deep breath and then wish you hadn't. Fresh air doesn't help the wine. Someone puts a hand on your arm to steady you. You agree to this without saying anything. Independence is no longer important. It seems like the street is longer as you walk. The light from the lamp moves. Shadows get longer. You feel both very empty and very thoughtful. You don't want to question this because it seems philosophical. You try to remember what happened that night. You remember bits and pieces like laughter, strong opinions, the sober man's face, and something you said that seemed important. The specifics are, you are no longer here, but you were brilliant. Your escort patiently listens as you talk to yourself about your own thoughts. They don't answer. This is being nice. You stop when you finally get to your door. You get the sense that something important has happened, something that will last, something that you will always remember. You won't remember it. Tomorrow morning you will have a headache, a dry mouth, and a vague feeling that you owe someone an apology, but you won't know who. But tonight you are sure. The symposium went well. You made it through, which in ancient Greece meant you took part. Morning comes no matter what you did the night before. There is no smooth transition or respectful pause. You wake up feeling like an angry God has called you to account for your actions and found them lacking. Your head hurts in a way that makes you think. Your mouth is dry, your eyes don't want to open, and your body won't work with you unless you negotiate. You lie still for a moment, hoping this is only for a short time. No, it isn't. When memory comes back, it does so in a selective and cruel way. You remember being sure of yourself. You remember how loud it was. You remember being completely sure you were right. You don't remember why. Pieces come to the surface. A sign, a laugh that lasted too long, a sentence that started with confidence and ended in a dangerous place. You play back moments in your head, hoping to make sense of them. Instead of finding new layers of regret, you sit up slowly. You think this is a mistake, but you keep going. The room tilts a little, as if to make a point. You see this as criticism. Now comes the real danger, running into people. Everyone who walks by seems like they could be a witness. Did they hear you last night? Did they hear about you last night? You look at people's faces to see if you know them, judge them, or worse, laugh at them. Someone says hello to you in a friendly way. This doesn't make you feel better. Warmth brings back memories. You try to put the symposium back together in a logical way. There was wine, there was a disagreement. People laughed. At some point, you were winning an argument. You know this for sure. You don't mind that there isn't any proof. It just bothers you. Then you think of him, the sober guy, the person who paid attention, the person who nodded, the one who will remember everything you said exactly and without pity. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the morning air. You think about not seeing him again. During the day, everyday tasks seem harder. People talk louder. Every sound feels like it's coming from you. You promise yourself that you will never drink that much again. The promise feels real and will last until the next time you invite them. By nightfall, the worst of the pain is gone, but you still feel resigned. No matter what you said, it's too late now. The symposium is now a thing of the past. Yours broke and forgave. Some are exact and lasting. You tell yourself, this is part of the process. This is how ideas are tested. This is how men learn mostly. This is how men learn to pace their drinking. You survive the morning, you survive the day, and by nightfall, you almost believe you'd do it all again. With a little distance and a lot of water, you begin to understand what last night really was. It was not chaos. It was not refinement either. It was something in between, a strange human machine that turned wine, voices, ego, and time into ideas that occasionally mattered. Ancient Greek parties did not produce philosophy because everyone behaved well. They produced philosophy because people didn't. Ideas were not born in silence or calm contemplation. They came from arguments, contradictions, exaggerations, and the simple refusal to stop talking even when logic had clearly left the building. You didn't go to the symposium to find the truth. You went to test it loudly, imperfectly, and in front of witnesses. You threw thoughts into the room the way others threw wine, carelessly, enthusiastically, and with very little concern for cleanup. Most of what was said last night will never matter. It will dissolve into jokes, retellings, and second-hand embarrassment. But a few, there will always be fragments, questions, challenges, and contradictions. Someone will remember them. Someone will revisit them when they are sober. Someone will write them down later without the slurring and confidence. This is the part of history that people don't want to talk about. The great ideas of ancient Greece didn't come from calm minds. They were worked out in rooms like this, smoky, loud, and uncomfortable rooms where men lay down awkwardly, drank too much, interrupted each other, and mistook confidence for insight until insight. You weren't at a party, you were at a social engine. The symposium was a place where hierarchy softened, restraint loosened, and voices collided without a clear winner. It let people say the wrong thing loudly enough for someone else to correct it later. That correction not the original speech, is what survived. From nights like this came philosophy, politics, theater, and art, not because the environment was ideal, but because it was human, messy, emotional, flawed, repetitive, loud. So when you imagine ancient Greek parties, do not picture calm men in white robes nodding thoughtfully. Picture a room full of confidence, spilled wine, half finished thoughts, and one man who remembers everything. Picture ideas being born not from order, but from friction. You were not there to behave. You were there to contribute even badly. And somehow, against all odds, it worked. That is what ancient Greek parties were actually like. Before cooking became culture, it was. Long before kitchens had walls or names, they were just rings of stones around a fire that never truly slept. In the ancient world, flame was the first tool, the first technology, and the first line between life and death. Cooking did not begin with taste, it began with necessity. Early humans quickly learned that raw food was risky. Meat spoiled fast, roots were hard to digest, and parasites were an invisible threat. Fire changed all of that. Heat softened tough fibers, killed disease, and released an energy trapped inside plants and flesh. A roasted animal was not just safer to eat, it fed more people for longer. In this sense, cooking was humanity's earliest form of efficiency. These first meals were simple but deliberate. Meat was skewed on sharpened sticks or laid directly on hot stones. Tubers were buried in ash to cook slowly underground. Nothing was wasted. Bones were cracked for marrow. Fat dripped into the fire and flavored everything around it. Smoke clung to hair, skin, and clothing, becoming the smell of everyday life. There weren't any recipes, but there was information. Elders knew which plants could be eaten after being cooked and which ones would always be dangerous no matter what you did to them. Fire made roots that were bitter bearable and turned seeds that were poisonous into staples. You learned how to cook by watching, copying, and remembering, not by writing. Fire itself became more organized over time. Hearths were built in places that didn't change. The ash was cleared, the stones were arranged, and the airflow was controlled. This was not a mistake. A good hearth meant steady heat, which meant food that was easy to guess. Food that was easy to guess meant stability. Settlements meant stability. Cooking helped people stay in one place long before farming took over completely. The taste came later. At first, there was just heat, smoke, and time. But even then, people started to have favorites. Some foods tasted better when they were roasted than when they were boiled. When cooked slowly, some meats tasted sweeter. These little things were the first steps toward cooking. The beginning of cooking was not very exciting. There was smoke, dangerous and messy. Burns were common. Fires spread. But every time you cooked a meal, it changed the way your body and brain worked, giving you more energy, bigger communities, and longer lives. It was fire, patience, and hunger working together that made cooking an art, a tradition, and a pleasure. Cooking became safer as fire became more controlled. This change became very clear in ancient Mesopotamia, which was one of the first cities in the world. Clay. Pottery changed the way people lived in ancient times. For good, food was no longer just burnt or roasted. Now it could be simmered, mixed, and changed slowly over time. In Mesopotamian kitchens, clay pots were placed directly on the hearths. These pots were great for boiling and stewing, which are great ways to cook in a place with rivers, grain, and animals. Barley, wheat, onions, garlic, and lentils were the main ingredients in most meals. Cooking meat in broths that could feed a lot of people at once made it a luxury that didn't last long. What makes? What makes Mesopotamian cooking so special is that it was written down on clay tablets with cuneiform writing. Some of the oldest recipes that people know of were written down by scribes. These were not poetic descriptions, but lists of steps, amounts, and ingredients that were useful. Cooking had officially become a skill that was worth keeping. The stews were hard to make. They mixed meat with leeks, herbs, fermented sauces, and fats. Some recipes used milk, beer, or blood to make things thicker. Balance gave the flavor. Instead of spicy heat, layers of salty, sour, and earthy notes that feel surprisingly modern. These meals were not made alone. Kitchens were places where people could get together, especially in big homes and temples. Women, servants, and enslaved people made a lot of food for families, workers, and gods. People cooked offerings to gods with the same care as they did meals for people, which strengthened the idea that food connected the divine and the everyday. Technology quietly helped all of this. Ovens made of clay and brick could bake bread, and covered pots could keep heat and moisture in. Lids were important. Timing was important. Experience was important. People liked a good cook not only for the taste of the food, but also for how well they made it. We learned something important from Mesopotamian cooking. Once food could be stored, it could be planned. Meals could be more filling, more satisfying, and more dependable. Cooking was no longer just about getting through the day. It was about keeping a society going. The old kitchen had everything from smoky fires to bubbling stews, had finally taken shape. In ancient Egypt, cooking was done along the river. The Nile didn't just flood fields and give crops food. It set the time for meals every day. It was the water levels that decided what could be grown, stored, and eaten. Egyptian cooking was very practical. It was based on having a lot of food when nature allowed it, and not having too much when it didn't. Almost every meal started with bread, mostly made of emma wheat and barley. It came in many shapes, like flat, thick, and sweetened, with dates or shaped into loaves to give as gifts. Grinding grain was hard work that people did every day with stone kilos. Sand always got into the flour, and over time it slowly wore down teeth. Bread was good for you, but it wasn't easy to eat. Beer was just as important. It was safer than water because it was thick, cloudy, and had little alcohol. Both adults and kids drank it. To make beer, partially baked bread was crumbled, soaked, and fermented. It gave people calories, nutrients, and comfort, turning it into a liquid meal instead of a drink in the modern sense. Kitchens in Egypt were basic but well organized. Hearths were made of mud bricks, and clay ovens baked bread by keeping heat inside domed structures. The bottoms of cooking pots were round, and they were made to sit in ash or be held up by stones. There was no hurry. Most dishes cooked slowly, with patience instead of fire. Vegetables filled in the spaces that meat couldn't. People often ate onions, leeks, garlic, lettuce, and legumes, fresh or cooked into soups. People ate a lot of fish from the Nile, which they dried or salted to keep it fresh. Meat, like beef, goat, or chicken, was only eaten by the rich, at festivals and in temples. It was more of a treat for most people than something they expected every day. There were spices, but they weren't very strong. They only used a little bit of coriander, cumin, and herbs, which made the food taste better without overpowering it. Honey was the main sweetener, and it was used to sweeten breads and cakes for special events. Cooking was meant to provide food, balance, and comfort. Not too much. The food also had a lot of meaning. People thought that eating would continue after death, so offerings in tombs and temples looked like real meals. Living well was not enough to cook well. It was to get ready for forever. In Egypt, cooking was steady, predictable, and dependable. It fed a society that valued harmony, order, and living in harmony with nature. One loaf of bread and one cup of beer at a time. In ancient Greece, cooking moved from the dark inside to the open air. Greek homes were. Their kitchens were also built around courtyards. Smoke went up, light came in from above, and the weather had as much to do with how meals were made as culture did. It was easier to cook here than in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but it was still on purpose. Olive oil was the most important part of Greek cooking. It was all of these things at once: fat, fuel, flavor, and preservation. Instead of animal fat, most foods that were fried, drizzled, or stored used olive oil. A meal was bread dipped in oil. People thought that cooking vegetables in oil was done. Even fish was often grilled and then served with just oil and herbs. Instead of fixed hearths, Greek kitchens used portable clay braziers. You could move these small charcoal stoves around, depending on the weather or the event. Skewers were used to roast meat, and pots were placed directly on top of the fire to boil and stew. This adaptability worked well for a culture that valued eating together and living outside. Grains were still important, but bread in Greece was rough and thick, and it was often mixed with barley. Bread made from wheat. It was there, but it was pricey and linked to status. Porridge and flatbreads were common foods for most people. The meals were filling, not too much. There were a lot of vegetables, and they were the main focus. Cabbage, onions, lentils, chickpeas, and greens were always there, either cooked simply or raw. Fish was more common than meat, especially in communities along the coast. Meat was closely linked to sacrifice. During religious festivals, people killed animals, and cooking became a public ritual. The gods got the fat and smoke. The rest of the food was eaten by people. Greek cooking got its flavor from not using too much. Oregano, thyme, and mint are examples of herbs that added smell without making the food too strong. Garlic was a common thing. People used wine to cook and vinegar to make sauces taste better. There were spices from faraway places, but they were hard to find and expensive, so people didn't use them very often. Meals were structured but also social. At symposia, men often ate together while lying down and having servants bring them food. Women did the cooking but didn't often join in on these events. So, cooking showed social boundaries as well as taste. Greek food was all about finding the right balance between being simple and filling, ritual and routine. The kitchen wasn't meant to be impressive. One olive oil dish at a time, it tried to keep the body, mind, and civic life going. In ancient Rome, cooking became two very different things. The rich had a kitchen full of tools, servants, and imported food. There was also the street, where most Romans ate. Most people lived in small apartments with little or no space to cook. Apartment buildings with very little or no room to cook. Kitchens were rare, and open flames were dangerous. Because of this, Roman cities had some of the first real street food cultures in history. There were thermopolia on every street, small food stores with counters that have clay jars holding hot food. Workers, travelers, and the poor in cities were quickly served stews, beans, lentils, bread, sausages, and fried foods. You stood up to eat, often with your hands, while vendors yelled and made noise. Comfort wasn't as important as convenience. Roman kitchens were useful, but smoky for people who could cook at home. Heard burned wood or charcoal and bronze or iron cookware that could handle very high temperatures. The Romans were sure they could roast, boil, fry, and bake. There were both private and public bread ovens that made loaves on an industrial scale for cities with hundreds of thousands of people. The most important thing about Roman cooking was the source, especially garum. Garum is made from fish guts that have been fermented and left to rot in the sun. Was very salty, strong smelling, and hard to avoid. People added it to almost everything, including wine, meat, and vegetables. It wasn't gross to the Romans. It was necessary. Roman food was also popular all over the world. The empire got its food from all over Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. India sent pepper, the desert sent dates, and Gaul and Spain sent wine. Wealthy families tried to outdo each other by being extravagant, serving strange animals, stuffed dormice, and fancy multi-course meals that were meant to impress, as much as feed them. Cooking in the best Roman homes was like putting on a show. Professional cooks were in charge of groups of slaves, making sure that the timing of the dishes was just right for the conversation and the show. Writers like Apicius wrote down recipes that were all about excess, complexity, and novelty, and food as a status symbol. But even with all the luxury, the average Roman meal was still simple: olives, beans, bread, and wine with water. Meat was not always available. People were often hungry. Cooking showed how unfair the empire was. There was food all over Rome, in kitchens and on the street, in temples and at parties. Cooking was no longer just a way to stay alive or a tradition, it was also a way to show who you were, have power, and show off. In the Aztec Empire, cooking didn't start with fire, it started with stone. Maize was the main food for the day, and you couldn't eat it raw. It had to be changed by nixtamalization, which meant soaking dried corn in a lime or ash based alkaline solution. This process made the kernels softer, released nutrients, and made maize into something that could support an empire. This chemistry wasn't an accident. It was knowledge passed down through the generations and improved over time. Corn causes malnutrition if it isn't mixed with amylization. With it, the maize is finished. This quiet but brilliant method was important for every Aztec kitchen. Once it was ready, they ground the corn by hand on a mat, which is a flat stone with a heavy grinding tool. This was hard work that women usually did before dawn every day. The result was masa, a soft dough that could be made into tortillas, tamales, and many other foods. The cooking started early because hunger didn't wait for anyone. It was easy to make Aztec hearths. They were usually made of pink stones that held up a clay comal, which is a flat griddle that was heated over fire. Tortillas were made quickly, flipped by hand, and eaten right away. They weren't side dishes, they were all at once plates, spoons, and staples. They wrapped everything up. Meals were made with beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, and herbs. Meat was not common. People sometimes ate turkey, dog, fish, or insects, but most of the time they had to eat plants. Ideology. Chilies added heat, flavor, and a way to keep food fresh. The food was spicy, smoky, and had a strong smell. Chocolate was one of the most important drinks. Cacao beans are ground up and mixed with water, chili, and spices to make this. It was cold, bitter, and foamy. Chocolate wasn't a sweet treat. It was a way of life, money, and power. Only the rich could drink it freely. It was holy and hard to find for everyone else. Religion and cooking were closely linked in the Aztec world. Fire was alive. Gods ate the food that was offered to them. Meals were based on calendars, rituals, and the universe. Cycles, even cooking every day, had spiritual meaning. The technology was subtle but worked. There were no metal pots and pans. But the system did work. Iron and steel were replaced by stone, clay, fire, and timing. Tradition, not tools, made things work better. Aztec cooking was hard work, boring, and necessary. It took hours to make each tortilla. People were reminded with every meal that they needed to pass down knowledge from one generation to the next in order to survive. Here, cooking was not a show or a luxury. It was discipline and devotion that made it taste good. In ancient China, cooking changed to become more efficient, balanced, and controlled. Chinese kitchens preferred methods that saved fuel and got the most nutrition out of food, unlike cultures that relied heavily on roasting and open flames. At first, this wasn't philosophical, it was useful. Wood was valuable, there were a lot of people, and cooking had to be quick, easy, and dependable. The hearth was small, and it was often built low to the ground, with openings that directed heat exactly where it needed to go. From. This became one of the most important cooking tools in history, the wok. The thin metal walls heated up quickly so food could cook in seconds instead of minutes. Stir frying wasn't about speed for the sake of speed. It was about staying alive in a world where resources are scarce. Cutting was just as important as cooking. Before being heated, the ingredients were cut into small, even pieces. This cut down on cooking time and made it easier to eat with chopsticks. People used knives to prepare food, not at the table. Cooking stopped the violence. Eating needed to be in harmony. The diet was mostly made up of grains. In the North, militant wheat was the most common type of wheat. Rice was the most important food in the South. Instead of being baked, rice was steamed in pots that kept heat and moisture in. Steaming kept the texture and nutrients while using less fuel than boiling. There were always vegetables like cabbage, greens, mushrooms, bamboo shoots, and roots. Fermentation turned soybeans into tofu, sauces, and pastes. Another quiet victory for technology. Fermented foods added protein, flavor, and shelf life. Life without having to keep things cold. There was meat, but not too much. When they could get it, pork and poultry were common, but they always added vegetables and grains to make it last longer. Bone broths took out all the nutrients they could. No one wasted anything. Cooking showed that people thought that balance, not too much of something, was what kept them healthy. The same logic applied to seasoning. Adding soy sauce, vinegar, ginger, garlic, and scallions gave the dish more flavor without making it too strong. Spices were used on purpose, not too much. The goal was to make salty, sweet, and sour foods work together. Sour, bitter, sweet, and savory, an idea that would later be formalized but was already used without thinking about it. Chinese cooking was also closely linked to medicine. The body was affected by the food, heating, cooling, drying, or making something wet. The season, your health, and your age all had an effect on what you cooked. The kitchen was a part of preventative care. In ancient China, cooking was not a show. It was skill through self-control. The heat was short, the cuts were sharp, and the meals were made to. Quietly, efficiently, and every day, support the body and keep it in balance. The weather, beliefs, and an early mastery of flavor all played a role in how people cooked in ancient India. Indian cooking has always been complex, unlike many old cuisines that used subtle spices. It wasn't an afterthought to add heat, smell, and spice. They were the kitchen's base. Grains were the main part of meals every day. Wheat was the main crop in the north, and it was made into flatbreads that were cooked on hot grar. In the south, rice was the most important food. It was boiled or steamed too. Go with stews and vegetables. These staples were filling, but on purpose plain so that stronger flavors could be added on top. The use of spices was what made Indian food stand out. There was a reason for using turmeric, cumin, coriander, mustard seed, ginger, and black pepper. They were toasted, ground, and mixed together for a reason. In hot weather, spices helped keep food fresh, helped with digestion, and added flavor without using meat. Cooking here was like chemistry, but with experience. The fire was under control, but always. Clay hearths burned wood or dried dung, which made a steady heat that was perfect for slow cooking. The pots had thick walls so that lentils, vegetables, and grains could simmer into healthy stews. You could leave these dishes to cook on their own, which gave you time to work and do rituals. People ate different amounts of meat. Religious beliefs kept it from being used in many places, or people didn't use it at all. The cow became especially holy, and people started eating dairy instead of killing cows. Yogurt, butter, and clarified ghee were made from milk, which turned into one of the most important fats for cooking. Ghee made things richer, more stable, and tastier, and it burned cleanly in hot pans. Vegetarian cooking grew not because of limits, but because of new ideas. Legumes and lentils gave us protein. There were many ways to cook vegetables, like frying, stewing, spicing, or fermenting them. The meals were well balanced in terms of texture and flavor, so they were filling without being too much. Cooking was very ritualized. There were rules about when and how to eat. There were certain times of day when certain foods were eaten. Hands were cleaned. The pots were cleaned very carefully. It wasn't easy to eat. It was a controlled act that had to do with health and spirituality. Old Indian kitchens also knew how to cook for the body. Food was put into groups based on how it made people feel, heavy or light, hot or cold. Cooking was a way to keep the body in balance and avoid getting sick, not a way to treat it. In India, cooking was more than just a way to feed the body. It was about getting the body to fit in with the environment, beliefs, and balance. Every spice and every method had it served a purpose that went far beyond taste, keeping both body and soul alive. Kitchens in the ancient world looked very different from each other, but they came up with very smart ways to solve the same problem. The hearth was always the center of daily life, whether it was made of stone, clay, or dirt. Cooking was not something that happened in the background. It was constant work that changed bodies, schedules, and societies every day. Cooking from long ago shows how well people adapted to their surroundings. Stews in river valleys, stretched grains and meat. In dry places, spices helped food stay fresh and made it easier to digest. Roasting and smoking kept food from going bad in forests and plains. Every technique came about because it was needed, not because it was easy. Technology was important, but not in a loud way. Clay pots let things simmer. Griddles were made from flat stones. Fermentation changed ingredients that would spoil into stable staples. None of these needed special tools, only watching, waiting, and doing it again. Progress didn't always look like innovation. A lot of the time, it looked like it had been refined. Cooking also showed how unfair things were. The rich liked variety and show. People who weren't rich ate what kept them alive. Street food fed the people in cities. Gods ate in temple kitchens. The same fire cooked both survival meals and fancy banquets, depending on who had control over the food. The kitchen was a place where gender and work were always together. In many cultures, women were responsible for daily tasks like preparing food, grinding grain, tending fires, carrying water, and cleaning pots. It took time, strength, and effort to cook. Endurance. It wasn't easy to make meals. They were deserved. Food had more meaning than just nutrition. Offerings were made to gods. Some foods were eaten to celebrate, show status, or show purity. The food you ate and how you ate, it showed who you were. Cooking was as much a part of belonging as language or clothing. Even though it was hard, cooking in the past was quick. Nothing went to waste. The bones turned into broth. The ash turned into fertilizer. The food that was left over became the next meal. This wisdom is often hidden by modern abundance. But old kitchens were all about being exact and holding back. These meals still feel very familiar, which is probably the most surprising thing. Bread, stews, sauces, flatbreads, and foods that have been fermented. These are not old things. They are still the basis today. We don't always realize how much modern kitchens owe to old ones. In the past, cooking took a long time, made a lot of smoke, and was hard work. But it was also smart, flexible, and very human. Long before written science or modern technology, every meal was a way to pass on centuries of knowledge from one person to another. The most important problem was solved by ancient cooks. Of all, how to turn nature into food every day with whatever tools were on hand. A violent lightning storm hit a small village in the Austrian Empire in 1856, the year Nikola Tesla was born. Family stories say that when he was born, the sky cracked with thunder, and a midwife called him a child of darkness. His mother answered in a calm voice, "No, a child of light." It was a poetic overstatement, but one that would stay with Tesla for the rest of his life. Tesla's mind worked differently from a young age. The mind acted in a different way. He didn't think of ideas in a vague way. He saw them in their full form. He had strong visual hallucinations as a child. Sudden flashes of light and pictures that were so real they seemed to be part of the real world. These events were scary, but they also taught his mind how to work on its own. To deal with his problems, Tesla learned how to deliberately picture things in his mind, spin them around, test them mentally, and fix problems before anything was ever built. This skill would later become his best. Power. Tesla grew up in an environment full of language, rules, and expectations. His father, a Serbian Orthodox priest, wanted him to be a writer, not a mechanic. Even though she couldn't read or write, his mother was a great inventor in her own right. She made household tools and mechanical aids from scratch, using only her intuition. Tesla later said that she gave him the spark of creativity that led to his inventions, even though she never wrote anything. Tesla was very obsessive as a child. He memorized whole books, did math in his head for fun, and came up with an obsessive relationship with patterns and doing things over and over. He was weak in body, but strong in mind. I only slept for short periods of time. His mind was always racing. When he was a teenager, he almost died from an illness. Tesla was bedridden with cholera for months and was close to death. His father promised him that if Tesla lived, he would let him study engineering. Tesla got better and never forgot the deal. From then on, his life focused on one thing: becoming an expert in electricity. Tesla had trouble with authority even when he was a student. He worked too hard and then went against the rules. He impressed his professors at first, but then let them down. There was no doubt about how smart he was, but he also had trouble fitting into normal systems. Tesla was already living in the future when he left home, designing machines in his head. That the world didn't have the right tools, time, or creativity to understand yet. When Nikola Tesla left his childhood home to study engineering, he didn't go to school as a student looking for help. He went in as a man who was sure that his mind worked faster than the system that was supposed to hold it. This stress would shape his life as a young adult. Tesla studied engineering in Graz, where his genius quickly became clear. He could do hard math in his head, remember what he read in books, and see machines in his mind as clearly as a photograph. At first, professors praised him, but Tesla didn't just study electricity. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He worked all day and night, only sleeping when he could. For only a few hours, pushing himself with a level of discipline that was almost self-destructive. Tesla became obsessed with alternating current during these years. He didn't like direct current, which was the most common system at the time. It used up energy, needed constant help, and didn't look good. Tesla thought that electricity should flow like breath in a natural, rhythmic way. He was sure that alternating current was the way of the future, even though his teachers said it was too dangerous or impractical. There was a fight. Tesla openly challenged professors, correcting them in public and refusing to give up on ideas he thought were right. At first, I admired him, but then I started to worry. His work schedule became unpredictable. There were times when I was very productive, but then I fell apart. Gambling started to happen, first as a way to get away from things, then as a need. He lost his scholarship. His academic path broke. Tesla never finished school. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. Evidence that talent without discipline doesn't get you anywhere. But Tesla wasn't done yet. He traveled around Europe, working as an engineer for a short time, fixing things, learning about machines, and improving his ideas. He was poor and often hungry, but he was mentally alive. Then came the moment that made everything clear. Tesla suddenly stopped while walking with a friend in a park and reading poetry. He suddenly saw the rotating magnetic field, the secret to getting alternating current motors to work well. He made drawings in. He drew in the dirt with a stick to explain a system that wasn't real yet, but was fully formed in his head. This is how Tesla did his job. He didn't mess around without thinking. He waited until he was sure, then he did what he knew was right, but being sure didn't pay the rent. There was no place in Europe for a man who questioned authority, rejected tradition, and wouldn't give in. Tesla knew that he needed a different stage for his ideas to live on. That stage was in a country across the ocean that was fueled by ambition, speed, and wires for electricity that still need to be built. When Nikola Tesla got to New York City in 1884, he didn't have much with him besides a letter of introduction, some poems, and a strong belief in what he thought. There was already a lot of electricity in the city, but not the kind that Tesla thought there was. Thomas Edison was the most powerful supporter of direct current in the United States. At first, Tesla worked for Edison, fixing generators and figuring out technical problems that other people couldn't. He quickly made a good impression on his bosses. When machines broke down, Tesla fixed them. When design got stuck, he made them better. His mind moved through complicated things without any trouble, but respect was not the same as admiration. Edison believed in trying things out and making mistakes. Tesla had faith in accuracy, theory, and mental design. The two men were very different from each other. Edison was well known for not trusting alternating current, which he thought was dangerous and impractical. Tesla thought that direct current was a waste of time and space. What started as a disagreement between professionals quickly turned into war of ideas. Tesla said that Edison promised him a big bonus if he made his machines better. Edison later laughed off the promise as a joke. It didn't matter if it was a mistake or a lie. The outcome was the same. Tesla left feeling ashamed and poor. What happened next was horrible. Tesla dug ditches to stay alive. The man who imagined the future of electricity now worked with a shovel, burying wires he thought were no longer useful for a living. But Tesla didn't give up on his ideas, even when they were in the dirt. He waited. When he got the chance, people who put money into his alternating current system saw its potential. Finally, Tesla had the money and materials he needed to build and show off his motor. When it worked perfectly, smoothly, quickly, and could be expanded. It proved everything that Tesla had said. This started what is now known as the War of the Currents. Edison started a public fear campaign by electrocuting animals to make people think that alternating current was dangerous. Tesla didn't act out. Instead, he showed that he was in charge. He let electricity flow through his own body, lighting lamps without wires and showing the public that it was safe to use alternating current. The fight wasn't just about technology. It was about who would have power, who would have a good name, and who would make the world today. Edison was rich, owned factories, and had power. Tesla had a vision. In the end, practicality won the war. With little loss, alternating current could travel long distances. Direct current couldn't. Tesla's system was used by power plants. Cities became brighter. The industry sped up. Tesla had won. But winning came with a price. He got famous, but not stable, and the world was just starting to see how deep his ambition was. Winning the War of the Currents made Nikola Tesla a scientific celebrity almost right away. His system of alternating current-powered factories, cities, and streetlights, and newspapers started to call him a genius and a visionary. Tesla amazed crowds at public lectures with controlled lighting, glowing tubes, and machines. That looked like it came from the future. Electricity which used to be scary and invisible, became something theatrical, and Tesla was its magician. For a short time, everything fell into place. Tesla worked with powerful people, like business people who saw the value of his inventions. Royalties came in. He lived well, dressed well, and easily moved through high-class social circles. He lived in hotels. Not only did journalists want to know what he thought about electricity, but also about the future of all people. But underneath, things were already starting to get unstable. Tesla was not a business person. He didn't like contracts, stayed away from negotiations, and trusted people too easily. Tesla gave up patent royalties that would have made him one of the richest men of his time when his partners were under a lot of financial stress. He thought that ideas were more important than money and that being useful would always lead to recognition. No, it didn't. His strange habits grew as he got more famous. Tesla became more and more ritualistic. He stayed away from physical contact, made strict schedules, and showed signs of being obsessive. He worked by himself, slept very little, ate only certain foods, and stayed away from people he knew. There were more invitations, but less closeness. His goals went beyond what was realistic. Tesla was no longer happy with just making power systems better. He wanted to change the way people talk to each other, get around, and even the way energy works. He talked openly about sending electricity wirelessly around the world, which was an interesting idea for the investors were scared, but the public was. Tesla was becoming hard to predict for investors. Tesla chased visions while other people built businesses around electricity. He spent a lot of money on experiments because he thought that success was always just one breakthrough away. Money came in faster than it went out. Projects came to a halt. Deadlines were missed. Tesla was still sure, though. He thought that the world would eventually understand his ideas. He didn't think about how much time and patience it would take. At the end of this time, Tesla was still well known and well liked, but more and more alone. His success was based on shaky ideas that genius would automatically be rewarded and that the future would wait for him. No, it wouldn't. Tesla's biggest project and biggest failure were both about to happen. At the start of the new century, Nikola Tesla became obsessed with one idea: a world without wires. Messages and power sent through the air freely, endlessly, and to everyone. This wasn't for Tesla. Dream. It made sense for people to move forward in this way. He imagined a world covered in invisible energy, where information and electricity flowed as easily as sound. Ships would use wireless signals to find their way. News would get around very quickly. Without wires, cities would light up. Tesla thought the future was already set. It just needed money. That money came from rich people who were interested in wireless communication. With their help, Tesla started building a huge building on Long Island, the Wardenclyffe Tower. Island, the Wardenclyffe Tower. It was supposed to be the center of a global energy network, rising like a metal skeleton against the sky. Shafts that went underground went very deep into the earth. Nearby buildings were full of coils and generators. The whole thing was too big, too experimental, and too expensive. At first, people were very sure. Tesla thought that wireless radio transmission would lead to power, but things went wrong with the project right away. Costs went through the roof. Results lagged. Investors grew uneasy. The core problem was not technical alone, it was philosophical. Tesla wanted to give an energy away. His backers wanted profit. When they realized Tesla's system could not easily be monetized or controlled, enthusiasm turned to suspicion. Funding slowed, then stopped. Meanwhile, competitors achieved practical success. Others transmitted radio signals using simpler, cheaper methods. They published results. They started companies. Tesla called them short-sighted copycats. Making a point. His system was better. He might have been right from a technical point of view. Commercially, he was irrelevant. Construction halted. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to ambition without support. Tesla refused to abandon it, but without money, he could not continue. Creditors closed in. Equipment was sold. The dream collapsed quietly, without ceremony. For Tesla, the loss was devastating. Warden Cliff was not just a project. It was proof of his worldview. Its failure marked a turning point. Investors stopped returning his calls. Newspapers lost interest. Invitations dried up. Yet Tesla did not retreat. He simply turned inward. If the world would not fund his visions, he would continue imagining them alone. The tower was eventually dismantled. The materials were sold for scrap. What was left was an empty field and a question that still needs to be answered. Was Tesla too early or too idealistic for the world he wanted to power? Nikola Tesla did not change himself after Warden Cliff fell apart. He pulled back, the famous person who used to fill. Slowly, lecture halls turned into hotel rooms, notebooks, and routines that got stranger over time. Tesla was still thinking all the time, but no one was listening anymore. His work became more and more theoretical without investors. He said he had invented things that were never fully shown off. Death rays, machines that cause earthquakes, and weapons that can end wars. The headlines were great for newspapers, but they stopped believing the claims. For a lot of people, Tesla went from being a visionary to being a curiosity, a brilliant mind that was lost, not tied to reality. His daily routines became rituals. Tesla hated germs so much that he washed his hands all the time and wouldn't touch things that other people had touched. He wanted exact numbers, especially multiples of 3, in everything he did every day. He stayed away from physical relationships completely because he thought that being celibate would help him think more clearly. These rules used to help him focus, but now they make him feel even more alone. Things got worse financially. Tesla moved from one hotel to another, charming managers into extending credit based on his good name. He paid when he could and promised to pay later when he couldn't. Former partners moved away from each other. There were never any new investors. The world had moved on to making things in large quantities, corporate labs, and working together. Tesla stayed very much alone, but his mind never stopped working. He wrote down diagrams, equations and predictions in notebooks. Some of them were very impractical, others were very close to the truth. He talked about wireless communication devices that were small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. He thought about the world, networks of information. He talked about machines that could be controlled from a distance long before they were real. People mostly ignored these ideas because they were hidden by his growing strange image. Tesla became more alone, but he also became more attached to ideas than to people. He didn't get close to his coworkers. Instead, he got close to animals, especially pigeons. He took care of hurt birds, fed them every day, and talked about one pigeon with a lot of love, saying it meant more to him than any relationship with a person ever had. To the outside world, Tesla looked sad, even tragic. Once rich and famous, now poor and dependent. But this surface view leaves out something very important. Tesla never thought that comfort or fame were signs of success. He thought that ideas were more important than how people reacted to them. His reputation may have faded, but the systems he helped build kept growing. Cities got brighter, industries got louder, and alternating currents spread all over. Tesla may have been fading from public life, but the world around him was still going through his mind. During the last few decades of his life, Nikola Tesla lived in a strange contradiction. People still knew his name, but he seemed to be a ghost. People invited him to birthdays, anniversaries, and interviews, not because they paid him to work, but because he was a symbol of a time when inventors worked alone. While he was still alive, Tesla became a monument. He spent his days moving from one New York hotel to another, most notably the Hotel New Yorker, where he lived in smaller and smaller rooms. He made money from small stipends, occasional fees for lectures, and the quiet support of fans who thought the world owed him something. It really did, but debts of gratitude are not often paid on time. During birthday interviews with journalists, Tesla kept talking about new inventions. He talked about directed and energy weapons, new ways to move things, and new ways to talk to each other. Some people thought these claims were just the fantasies of an old mind. Others felt pieces of ideas that technology hadn't yet caught up to. Tesla didn't bother to prove anything physically anymore. He was completely sure of himself in his mind. His routines became more strict. He always followed the same routes, ate the same meals, and followed number patterns with strict discipline. He didn't like any kind of change. These habits, which used to help him focus, now kept him from the world. People who met him said he was polite, well-spoken, and distant, always speaking from a place that was a little bit away from the present. But there were still times when things made sense. Tesla was knew that other people were getting credit for ideas he had had decades before. He saw radio, remote control, and electrical infrastructure change into exactly what he had predicted they would. There was no anger in this realization, just quiet acceptance. Tesla thought that truth didn't need to be praised to exist. His body got weaker as his health got worse, but his mind stayed sharp. He wrote, did math, and improved his ideas until the end. Tesla died alone in his hotel room in January 1943. There was no crowd, no laboratory, no dramatic final experiment, just silence. Within days, government officials seized his papers, fearing what they might contain. Myths exploded instantly. Had Tesla built secret weapons? Had he discovered forces too powerful to reveal? The reality was likely simpler and more profound. His notebooks were filled with ideas ahead of their time, many unfinished, some impractical, others waiting for a future capable of understanding them. Tesla left the world quietly, but the systems he shaped ensured the world would never be quiet again. Death did what life never fully managed to do for Nikola Tesla. It separated the man from the noise surrounding him. Once the headlines faded and the eccentricities were stripped away, what remained was the architecture of the modern world, quietly humming with his ideas. Alternating current became universal. Power plants, transformers, transmission lines all followed principles Tesla had defended when few believed him. Cities expanded vertically and horizontally because electricity could travel long distances efficiently. Factories ran non-stop. Homes lit up after sunset. None of this would have been possible without Tesla's core insight. Electricity had to move like a system, not a trick. Technologies Tesla imagined began to emerge one by one. Wireless communication reshaped the planet. Remote control became standard. Radio waves filled the air. Engineers rediscovered ideas Tesla had sketched decades earlier, now feasible with modern materials and computing. In many cases, his work was not copied. It was rediscovered. Public perception slowly shifted. Tesla transformed from forgotten oddity into misunderstood pioneer. Books reframed his story. Scientists cited his papers. Inventors invoked his name as a symbol of creativity unbound by convention. He became a cultural icon, not because he sought fame, but because his story warned of what happens when vision outpaces institutions. Unlike his rivals, Tesla never built an empire. He built foundations. Others profited from systems he made possible. This imbalance, once tragic, became part of his legend. Tesla represented the idea that progress does not always reward its architects, but it still depends on them. His name began appearing everywhere, in laboratories, on monuments, in textbooks. The unit of magnetic flux density was named the Tesla, embedding him permanently into the language of physics. His life, once defined by isolation, became a reference point for future generations. Tesla's legacy is not a single invention, it is a way of thinking, visualizing systems before building them, trusting theory. When evidence lags behind, believing that energy, information, and knowledge should move freely. The irony is sharp. Tesla dreamed of a world powered without wires, yet his greatest triumph lies in the wires themselves. Carrying alternating current across continents, powering lives he never met in cities he never saw. He died believing the world had passed him by. In truth, the world was still catching up. The life of Nikola Tesla forces an uncomfortable question. What does society do with people who see too far? Ahead? Tesla was not destroyed by failure of intelligence or effort. He was undone by a mismatch between vision and the systems meant to support it. Tesla believed ideas should serve humanity before profit. That belief shaped every major decision he made and cost him dearly. While others patented aggressively, built corporations, and protected revenue streams, Tesla loosened his grip. He gave away rights, ignored contracts, and trusted that usefulness would eventually translate into support. History shows it rarely does. His story reveals a harsh truth. Progress is often built by people who are not rewarded by it. The world prefers refinements over revolutions, predictable returns over uncertain leaps. Tesla offered leaps. Investors wanted ladders. Yet, it would be wrong to frame his life as tragedy alone. Tesla lived exactly as he chose. He rejected compromise, routine, and convention, not because he failed to understand them, but because he refused to submit to them. He traded comfort for clarity, stability for possibility, applause for conviction. Tesla also reminds us that innovation does not move in straight lines. Ideas can arrive decades before tools exist to support them. Being right too early can look exactly like being wrong. Tesla's wireless dreams, dismissed in his lifetime, are still unfolding today, not in the form he imagined, but in spirit. His loneliness, often emphasized, was not simply imposed by the world, it was partly chosen. Tesla prioritized ideas over relationships, systems over society, the future over the present. This choice gave him extraordinary focus and extraordinary isolation. Modern culture often romanticizes Tesla as a misunderstood martyr or secret genius. The reality is more complex. He was brilliant, difficult, generous, rigid, visionary, and flawed. He was human. What endures is not the myth, but the infrastructure. Every time a city lights up at night, every time electricity travels hundreds of miles without collapsing, Tesla's thinking is at work. His success did not come with applause or wealth. It came with permanence. Tesla's life teaches that the future does not always reward its architects, but it cannot exist without them. Some minds are not meant to fit their time, they are meant to bend it. And sometimes the measure of a life is not how comfortably it is lived, but how long its ideas last. Long before maps were objects you could fold or hang on a wall, they were ways of thinking. Ancient humans did not begin mapping out of curiosity alone. They did it because getting lost could mean death. A map was not about accuracy. In the modern sense, it was about memory, survival, and meaning. The earliest maps were mental before they were physical. People memorized landmarks, stars, coastlines, seasonal changes, and paths worn into the land by repeated movement. Knowledge was stored in stories, songs, and rituals. Turn where the river bends, stop before the red hill, travel when this star rises. Space was learned through repetition, not measurement. When humans finally began drawing the world, they did not try to copy it, they tried to explain it. Early maps emphasized what mattered most. Water sources were exaggerated, dangerous zones were highlighted, Sacred places were centered. Distance was often irrelevant. Importance was everything. This is why ancient maps can look strange to modern eyes. Rivers run in impossible directions. Cities appear larger than mountains. The sky and earth overlap. These were not mistakes. They were priorities. A map was a tool, not a mirror. Mapping was also an act of control. To name a place was to claim it. To draw a boundary was to assert authority. Kings mapped territory to tax it. Priests mapped the heavens to interpret fate. Travelers mapped routes to return home. Every map carried power and bias. Crucially, ancient people did not separate space from time. A place was different depending on season, weather, or ritual calendar. A road that existed in summer vanished in winter. A river crossing safe one month became deadly the next. Maps were dynamic, even when carved in stone or clay. The heavens were mapped alongside the earth. Stars were roads, constellations were calendars. The sky told people when to plant, travel, fight, or pray. To map the world was also to map time itself. Unlike modern maps, ancient ones were rarely meant for strangers. They assumed shared knowledge. You were expected to already understand the land. The map simply reminded you of relationships between places, people, gods, and cycles. At its core, mapping was an act of imagination grounded in experience. It asked one essential question: what parts of the world matter enough to? Remember, before grids, before north arrows, before scale, maps were stories told visually. They did not aim to show the world as it was everywhere. They aimed to show it as it mattered to those who lived within it. The earliest surviving physical maps come from Mesopotamia, and they tell us something important right away. Mapping began in cities, not wilderness. When humans settled permanently, space became something to organize, divide, tax, and defend. The map was born alongside bureaucracy. Mesopotamian maps were not drawn on paper, they were pressed into clay tablets using the same ununiform script used for laws, accounts, and prayers. This already tells us how maps were understood. They were records, official objects, part of administration, not art. Most Mesopotamian maps were small scale and highly selective. They showed irrigation canals, field boundaries, city districts, and property lines. These were practical documents meant to resolve disputes, allocate land, and manage resources in a landscape shaped by rivers that flooded unpredictably. When the land shifted, the map mattered, but Mesopotamia also produced something far more ambitious: maps of the entire world as they understood it. The most famous example is a Babylonian world map, often called the Imago Mundi. On it, the city of Babylon sits firmly at the center. Surrounding it is a circular river representing the known world, enclosed by a cosmic ocean. Beyond that lie triangular regions labeled as distant, dangerous, or unknown. This was not ignorance, it was worldview. To the Babylonians, the world was ordered around cultural and cosmic importance, not physical distance. Babylon was central because it was central to meaning, power, and divine favor. The map reflected hierarchy, not exploration. Text and image worked together. Written labels explained what drawings alone could not. Mountains were not drawn realistically, they were symbols. Rivers were straightened. Scale was irrelevant. What mattered was relationship. This city controls this canal. This land belongs to this god. This border marks authority. Mesopotamian maps also blurred geography and mythology. The edge of the world was not just far away, it was where monsters lived, where the normal order broke down. Mapping the unknown meant acknowledging danger, not erasing it. Importantly, these maps were not meant for travelers. They were meant for officials, priests, and rulers. Navigation still relied on experience and oral knowledge. The map's role was conceptual. It defined how the world was structured, not how to walk through it. In Mesopotamia, mapping was an extension of governance and belief. To draw the world in clay was to say, this is how reality is arranged, and this is where you stand within it. In ancient Egypt, maps were born from repetition. The land itself forced precision. Every year, the Nile flooded, erased boundaries, and then retreated, leaving behind fertile soil and confusion. Fields vanished, property lines dissolved. To govern, Egyptians had to redraw the world again and again. This is why Egyptian mapping focused less on exploration and more on measurement. Surveyors, often working for the state or temples, re-established borders after each flood. Using ropes, sight lines, and geometry, they recreated order from chaos. Mapping was an act of restoration, a way to return the land to its proper balance. Egyptian maps were often drawn on papyrus or carved into stone walls. They showed estates, canals, quarries, and roads, not in perspective, but in plan. Objects were flattened and symbolized. A temple was not shown as it looked, but as it functioned. A canal was a line of control, not a scenic feature. Orientation mattered. South was often placed at the top of the map, reflecting the upstream direction of the Nile. North, associated with chaos and foreign lands, fell below. This alone tells us that Egyptian maps were moral documents as much as spatial ones. Direction carried meaning. The Nile itself dominated Egyptian spatial thinking. It was the spine of the country, the axis around which everything else was organized. East and West were defined relative to it. Life, work, and agriculture belonged to the East, where the sun rose. Death and the afterlife lay to the West, where the sun set. Maps reflected this cosmic division clearly and deliberately. Egyptians also mapped beyond the earth. Tomb walls and papyri included detailed maps of the afterlife, routes the soul would travel after death. These were not symbolic suggestions. They were guides. They showed gates, obstacles, guardians, and paths that had to be followed correctly to reach eternity. To be lost in the afterlife was as dangerous as being lost in the desert. Astronomy fed directly into geography. Star maps aligned temples. Celestial cycles regulated time, labor, and ritual. The sky was treated as a second landscape, ordered and navigable, just like the land below. In Egypt, mapping was not about discovering new worlds. It was about maintaining balance in a world already known. To draw the land was to reaffirm cosmic order, a statement that chaos had been pushed back at least four. Another year. In ancient Greece, mapping took a sharp turn toward an abstraction and theory. Unlike earlier cultures that mapped to manage land or affirm cosmic order, Greek thinkers asked a more unsettling question. What does the world actually look like? Greek maps were born in the company of philosophy. Thinkers debated not just where things were, but why they were there, and whether the earth itself had a shape that could be understood through reason alone. This was a radical shift. Space was longer only experienced or inherited. It could be calculated. Early Greek maps were still rough, often placing the Mediterranean at the center and stretching unknown regions into vague edges, but the mindset behind them was new. Distance mattered, direction mattered, proportion mattered. A map was no longer just symbolic, it was an argument. One of the most important breakthroughs came from the idea that the Earth was spherical. This was not universally accepted at first, but it reshaped everything. If the world was round, then space could be measured systematically. Latitude and longitude were no longer fantasies, they were necessities. Greek scholars began combining travel reports, astronomical observation, and mathematics. By tracking the angle of the sun in different cities, they estimated distances across the globe. Coastlines were sketched based on sailors' accounts. Winds were classified. Climate zones were theorized. Mapping the world also meant mapping humanity's place within it. Greeks divided the earth into regions based on temperature and habitability. Some areas were thought too hot or too cold for civilization. These assumptions shaped how Greeks viewed foreign peoples, not as equals living elsewhere, but as products of their environment. Importantly, Greek maps were rarely used for navigation. Sailors still relied on experience, stars, and memory. The Greek map was primarily intellectual. It existed to explain the world, not to traverse it. This is why Greek maps often feel incomplete. Entire continents are missing or distorted, but within these limitations lies their achievement. They treated the world as something that could be known without seeing every part of it. Reason could fill gaps where experience failed. Greek mapping laid the foundation for later traditions. It introduced scale projection and the idea that geography could be a science rather than a collection of local truths. For the first time, a map was not just a guide through space, it was a theory about reality itself, drawn with lines, angles, and confidence that the universe followed rules humans could understand. If Greek maps were theories, Roman maps were tools. In the Roman Empire, mapping was stripped of philosophy and rebuilt for control. Rome did not need to know what the world looked like from above. It needed to know how fast an army could march through it. Roman mapping focused on movement, not shape. Roads mattered more than coastlines. Distances mattered more than proportions. A Roman map was less a picture of space and more a schedule, laid flat. The most famous example is the tabular putting, a long, narrow road map showing the empire stretched horizontally like a ribbon. Cities appear as dots. Roads run in straight lines. Seas are compressed. Mountains barely exist. To modernize, it looks absurd. To a Roman official, it was perfect. This map answered practical questions. How far is it from Rome to Alexandria? Where are the stopping points? How many days of travel? Where can horses be changed? Where are inns, garrisons, and supply depots? Geography became logistics. Roman surveyors were highly skilled. Using tools like the groma and corbades, they laid out roads with astonishing precision, often in straight lines that still define modern landscapes. These measurements fed into maps used by administrators, tax collectors, and military planners. Mapping was inseparable from governance. Unlike earlier cultures, Rome mapped aggressively outward. Conquest demanded documentation. Provinces were recorded, borders marked, resources noted. A place that was not mapped was not. Fully Roman, to draw a road through land was to claim it permanently. Roman maps also reinforced hierarchy. Rome itself was the fixed reference point. Distances were measured from the capital. All roads literally and symbolically led there. The map did not show the empire as equal regions. It showed a system radiating from power. Interestingly, Romans showed little interest in mapping the unknown. Beyond the borders lay barbarians, chaos, and irrelevance. The map ended where control ended. Unlike Greek curiosity or Mesopotamian cosmology, Roman mapping was confident enough to ignore what it could not dominate. For travelers, these maps were rarely carried physically. Knowledge was transmitted orally or through written itineraries listing towns and distances. The map existed behind the scenes, shaping infrastructure rather than guiding individuals. Roman mapping turned space into an extension of authority. Roads became veins, cities became nodes, distance became predictable. Through maps, Rome did not just move. Through the world, it organized it, standardized it, and held it together with ink, stone, and discipline. Across the vast Pacific, in cultures with no writing system and no paper maps, navigation reached a level of sophistication that still astonishes modern sailors. In the islands of Polynesia, mapping was not something you looked at. It was something you learned, memorized, and felt. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean long before compasses or sextants. They did not rely on written charts aboard their canoes. Instead, they carried maps in their minds, built from stars, waves, winds, birds, and memory. The ocean itself was the map. What outsiders later called stick charts were teaching tools, not travel guides, made from thin sticks tied together with fiber. These charts represented wave patterns, island positions, and ocean swells. Curved sticks showed how waves bent and reflected around land masses. Shells or knots marked islands. But these objects were never taken to sea. They were studied on land, then left behind. 2A. Polynesian Navigator, the ocean was structured. Swells moved in predictable rhythms. Different wave systems intersected and created recognizable patterns. Islands disrupted these patterns in subtle ways that could be sensed through the motion of the canoe. Navigation was tactile. You felt where you were. Stars were equally important. The night sky was divided into paths, with specific stars rising and setting in known directions. A journey was planned as a sequence of star bearings, adjusted as the night progressed. When the clouds covered the sky, navigators used the wind direction, the shapes of the clouds, the seabirds, and even the color of the water to find their way. This information was secret and holy. Long apprenticeships, often within families, were used to teach navigation. Errors were deadly. There was no room for mistakes in the open ocean. So, mapping was not an abstract idea. It was a skill that was embodied. Time and space were one and the same. A route was not only a direction, but also a length of time. You could tell where you were by how long you had been driving under certain conditions. Measurement was replaced by memory. Instruments were replaced by experience. At first, European explorers thought Polynesian navigation was just a stroke of luck. Researchers only later understood how organized it was. Polynesians weren't just guessing, they were looking at a complicated dynamic map that was written into the world around them. These maps go against what people think today. They show that you don't need paper, numbers, or a scale to understand space correctly. It needs focus, practice, and a deep connection to the environment. In Polynia, the map wasn't a thing. It was a connection between the navigator and the ocean, the sky and the canoe, the past and the present. There was no drawing of space. They lived it. While the Mediterranean world was arguing about geometry and empire, ancient Asia was making maps that were influenced by government, philosophy, and the order of the universe. In ancient China and India, maps were more about bringing people together than about exploring new places. They showed how human space fit with moral and natural law. Mapping in China came from the government. As as early states grew, their leaders needed to know where roads, rivers, farmland, and borders were. People often drew maps on silk, bamboo, and wood, and they often came with detailed written descriptions. Accuracy was important, but not by itself. A good map also showed how things were organized. The rivers ran the right way. There were mountains where they were supposed to be. Space reflected hierarchy. Long before other places, Chinese maps often used grid systems. This made it possible to measure distances in a consistent way and compare areas. But these grids were not fair. The capital was close to the center, which made politics more important. Visually, peripheral areas looked smaller or less detailed, which echoed their lower status. Chinese maps were important because they connected geography with cosmology. Mountains and waterways carried important life energy that shaped the landscape. Maps helped people find good places to build cities, tombs, and temples. It wasn't just practical to choose where to build, it was right and wrong. Mapping became a way to keep between heaven, earth, and people. Maps looked different in ancient India. Physical geography was mostly used for land grants and administration, but a lot of spatial knowledge was kept in texts. There were layers of regions, concentric continents, and sacred axes that made up the world. Mount Mu was in the middle of the universe, with oceans and lands around it that were arranged in a symbolic way. These were not mistakes in navigation, they were maps of the mind. Indian cosmology viewed space as inherently linked to morality and growth in the spirit. Pilgrimage routes were more important than political borders. People used verse and ritual memory instead of ink to map sacred rivers. Astronomy was once again very important. Calendars, star paths, and planetary cycles changed how people thought about space. Time and place came together. Knowing where you were also meant knowing when you were in cycles of rebirth, duty, and ritual obligation. Asian mapping did not try to conquer space through war or ideas like Roman or Greek traditions did. It wanted to put people in the right place in it. Maps were not only useful for getting around, but also for how to act. These customs remind us that mapping is more than just a technical skill. Every map shows what people value. In China and India, the value was a balance between the ruler and the land, people and the universe, and action and inaction. It wasn't possible to master the world. It was something that needed to be aligned with, and maps showed how to do it. Not all old maps were made to help people or ships find their way. Some were meant to help people live their lives. Mapping went beyond land and sea in many old cultures to include time, fate, and the heavens. These maps didn't show you where you were going, they showed when and why. Ancient people made some of the most accurate astronomical maps. Star charts showed how the sun, planets, and constellations moved through the seasons. In Mesopotamia, priests made maps of the sky to look for signs. In Egypt, stars lined up with tombs and temples. In China, celestial maps were like imperial bureaucracy, with heavenly officials watching over earthly ones. Mapping the sky helped people understand what order was. These maps were very useful. They were important for farming calendars. When a star rose in the morning, it meant it was time to plant or harvest. When a constellation went away, it meant that floods or droughts were coming. Time was not a concept. It was written across the sky in space. Sacred maps also showed souls where to go. In Egypt, detailed maps of the underworld showed the soul's journey after death, including gates, judges, dangers, and paths to eternity. These were not figures of speech, they were directions. 2. Know the map was to live after death. Calendars were like maps of the future in Mesoamerica. Days had gods, colors, directions, and meanings. Time moved in cycles through space, not in a straight line. Being born on a certain day put you at a certain place on a cosmic map that decided your fate. Time, space, and identity all came together. Cities were even mapped out in a symbolic way. A lot of old capitals were built like maps of the universe. Streets that were straight with solstices, palaces were the center of the world. Temples were like mountains. Or stars living in the city meant living inside a map that always reminded you of how the universe was put together. These maps that you couldn't see were often more important than the ones you could see. A traveler could lose their way and find their way back. A soul that lost its way didn't. A farmer who didn't pay attention to the calendar died of hunger. A ruler who ruled out of order lost their right to rule. Maps today separate space from meaning. Not very often did old maps do. Mapping something meant explaining how it fit into a bigger system. The question was not where this is, but what is this a part of? Ancient people turned uncertainty into structure by mapping heaven, time, and fate. They couldn't stop floods, death, or the stars, but they could put them on a map and give them a place to go. They turned the unknown into something that could be navigated by doing this, not with feet, but with faith, tradition, and memory. When you look at them all together, old maps show much more than just coastlines and routes. They show how people think when they don't know what's going to happen. Mapping was never just about space, it was about memory, meaning, control, and survival. Every old culture made a map of what it thought was most important. They made maps of canals and cities in Mesopotamia because they needed water and good government to stay alive. Egyptians made maps of the Nile and the afterlife because they thought their world was orderly and eternal. The Greeks used reason to map out abstract space. The Romans made maps of roads because moving around kept the empire going. The ocean made Polynesians map waves and stars. There is no such thing as a neutral map. Everyone is a confession. Old maps also show that people don't feel space the same way every time. We make things that matter seem bigger and things that don't matter seem smaller. Holy places get bigger. There are dangerous areas ahead. The known becomes the most important thing. The unknown is pushed to the edge or filled with stories. This is not a mistake, it's cognition. Modern maps try to be objective, but there are still choices to be made. What is given a name? What is bordered? What is in the middle? Old maps show these choices. They don't hide point of view, they say it. Mapping also shows a deep. People want to make sense of their experiences. To walk a path once is to remember it. To draw it means to last. Culture is what teaches it. Maps helped people pass on knowledge from one generation to the next, to go from one generation to the next, to live longer than the first people who walked the land. Ancient maps may be most important because they show us that people have always lived in more than one place at a time. Landscapes, social hierarchies, sacred cosmologies, and cycles of time. A map could show one or all, depending on the culture. Needed. We often look at old maps and think they are wrong because they don't match up with what we know now. But getting it right was never the goal. Relevance was a map that helped people survive, and ritual or identity worked no matter how big or small it was. In this way, old maps were very human. They combined observation with imagination and accuracy with faith. They agree that the world is too complicated to fully understand. So we decide what matters and draw it. Even now that satellites can take pictures of every part of the world, we still map in a selective way. We still put ourselves at the center. We still tell stories in space. Old maps remind us that mapping is more than just knowing where you are. It's about knowing who you are and what you think the world should be like.